Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Son of a Blitch podcast. I'm your host, George Blitch. Today, I got to sit down and chat with a wonderful man by the name of Joel Vanderloon. For those who aren't familiar, he's got quite the story. He was born in South Africa, lived off the grid in Tanzania. He has traveled to over 40 countries. He sailed across oceans. He has trained and learned alongside with many native peoples. He's taken courses in bushcraft survival, and then now he's an instructor, and that is one of his many jobs. He's also had a little bit of life in the public eye. He was on Discovery Channel's Bushcraft Build-Off, which then led to his experience of being on the television show Alone, where he was in season 7 out of the Great Slave Lake in the Northwest Territories of Canada. That experience was just profound for him. It was amazing to kind of watch that show and his journey. He was later invited back on to the Alone Skills Challenge. They just had season 1 last year, and he was a part of that. There's so much you can learn from those experiences, but I highly encourage you to also go and check out his YouTube page, which really can highlight a lot of his trips. His recent one with the Hadza people, where he goes every single year and travels, takes about 10 people there with him, lives with the tribe, hunts with the tribe, and really kind of immerses himself into that natural world once again, where I feel like he's most comfortable. And he talks about that experience, being a family man and just really being in tuned to the rhythms of this world and really wanting to be as good of a man and a good of a person as he possibly can be. We talk about his legacy there, and that was a big part of that. And, I really felt inspired, touched, honored that he shared his authentic self with us today. And it was just such a wonderful podcast. I'm a buzz. I feel there's just the charge that I got from having this real one-on-one conversation where he opened up so much of who he is, what he believes in, and really sharing an insight into the world of the Hadza people and other people he's traveled along with, and the good, the bad, the struggles, the idea of trying to protect the culture that they live in when there's so many other cultures trying to assimilate and kind of bring them in and out of their own native pathways that they've traveled and lived for tens of thousands of years. There's so much complexity that's involved in that. And, I think we covered a very good amount. We're going to have Joel back on again, because I think we just had a drop in the bucket for our conversations today. There's so much that, I think that there is here for you to absorb. And, you want to learn more about him, there are, ways for you to do that. And I think the YouTube page is a really good way, because he documents a lot of his life experiences there too. And, you can go over there to Bush Survival Training. Bush Survival Training is a great place for you to be able to sign up for one of his courses, Introduction to Hunting, survival courses, bushcraft training. It's a great website. He's doing this part-time. It's not a full-time thing. So if you contact me, don't hear back right away, be patient. And there's so many wonderful things that we got to cover today. Again, I feel honored and blessed. Joel, thank you for being on this podcast, and thank you all for listening. I know this is one you're going to really enjoy and get a lot out of. So without further ado, here is my interview with Joel Vanderloon. Enjoy. Hello, Joel. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, George. Good to be here.
Oh, man, I'm so excited to have you on. We got so many wonderful things to chat about. I figured let's just let the listeners start with the beginning of your story. Let's talk about where you were born in South Africa, and maybe transition to your time in Tanzania, and kind of where you started to learn about bushcraft, survival skill, and your love of the outdoors.
Yeah, I was born in South Africa, Durban, South Africa, and my dad he's originally Australian. Well, actually originally Dutch, I suppose. It's a long story. But when I was about 8 years old, my parents separated, and then he moved up to Tanzania, East Africa, which is a couple countries north of South Africa on the East Coast. And so I would jump back and forth between the two countries, and really fell in love with Tanzania as a young boy. Just the wildness of it and the sort of undeveloped aspect of it. The adventures you could have there were just a child's dream. But it was probably somewhere around the age of 12-ish where my dad bought a pretty big piece of land that was completely rural, undeveloped, and built a house and did it all off grid. And being kind of part of that process, and then also having the surrounding bushlands and coastlands, which were very, very wild. I mean, we're talking buffalo, and we even had a hippo come through there once, but we'd seen hyena, leopard, lion. There was waterbuck. There was just so much going on there. A lot of bush pig, which is what I took quite a passion to hunting. And so that's where I really developed my love for the wild bush, and the wildlife. And then I guess you could say bushcraft. I was quite taken back by the Maasai people, who we had employed to as sort of like guards on the property. I mean, we were obviously wanting to make sure that any people with bad intentions weren't coming in, but more importantly was keeping an eye on the wildlife. We had a lot of dangerous wildlife. So I got to talking to them and really put a lot of effort into learning the language. Swahili is the common language there. So I could communicate with them, and they would tell me stories which would just captivate me. And so they taught me how to track. That was the first memory I have of anyone actually teaching me how to track animals. And we'd trail these animals, and we'd try and hunt the bush pig together. And they would tell me about their traditional ways. And that was the first time that I started really getting really interested in trying to attempt some of these things myself, and just sucking up all the knowledge I could. Because at the age of like 5, I remember it was about 4 or 5, my grandfather, that was the first memory I'd had of a native person or a native tribe that really captured my interest, and that was the Sand Bushmen. He'd been out there to visit them, and he brought me back a little bow, traditional bow, and a quiver with arrows. And he sat me down one night, and we watched The Gods Must Be Crazy. And I had to get a loincloth. My mother got me a loincloth. She's got photos of me running around the yard shooting the bow and arrow. And yes, it was always something that I was very interested in. But it was honestly, I came to the States. I sailed over to the US in 2005. I worked at sea, sailboats and yachts and things for like quite a long time, 12 years. It gave me a lot of travel and a lot of adventure, which I have always loved.
As an engineer, what were you doing with that?
Yeah. So I started out on very, very small sailboats, sailing up and down the East African coast, and it really ignited my passion for. It was such a sense of adventure, right? You get out there in the middle of the ocean, and you're truly surrounded by wilderness. People ask me like, "What's the wildest place you've ever been?" In the middle of the Atlantic or in the middle of the Indian Ocean. No land in sight. That is the wildest place I've ever been. But I just took a great sense of interest, like in the part of like being so self-sufficient. Like you sail off and you only have yourself to rely on in order to get that boat from point A to point B, and all the challenges that face you on those trips. I mean, adverse weather, and you could have torn sails and engines break down and all sorts of things. Managing your food wisely, because you don't want to run out of food, and the trips never take as long as you think they will. They end up taking longer. And so like the challenge was incredible. Your sleep is so messed up because you're on watches, because someone has to be up at the helm 24/7. So yeah, all of that was just amazing for me. And so my dad had worked in the yachting industry in the Mediterranean as a young man with my mother, actually. And so he had sort of said, hey, there's an industry out there. You could go, great travel, and you could save some money. And so I just got a one-way ticket with my backpack to Europe, and ended up getting on a boat that I realized very quickly that the Mediterranean just wasn't the kind of environment that I wanted to be in. And so I got on a boat that sailed across the Atlantic, spent a season in the Caribbean, and then sailed up to the US, set foot in Florida for the first time. And I was like, oh, this country interests me. And so, I had actually spent, I think it was about a month in the US, and there was so much, I realized how big the country was and how much more I wanted to experience. So I managed to get a job. I kind of seeked for a job that was based in the US, and I ended up getting a job on a big sailboat that was based out of San Diego, California, and we'd spend a lot of time cruising Mexico. And at that time, I was such a passionate spear fisherman and surfer that I really wanted to spend time in Mexico because it's world-class spearfishing.
Oh yeah.
And so I did. And at that time, I had run across this beautiful American woman who's now my wife. And funny enough, you know, we ended up, she came back to Africa with me. She was there for, I think about 8 months. So she got to really see where I came from, and we worked together, traveled together there for a little while, but then ultimately ended up back in the US. And, you know, I'm a US citizen now. And if you had have asked me back in those days when I was running around the little African bush as a kid, and, you know, would you end up living in America? I would have said never. That's impossible. How would that happen? But I feel like the States has really, circling back, the States was a huge, I feel like this, when I got to the States, it just felt like home. It just felt like I was meant to be here. When I had we first sort of moved here officially and were living here, I wanted to do an expedition on a paddleboard down the Sea of Cortez, really challenge myself, and I wanted to take minimal gear. And so I thought to myself, I really want to know what I can find to eat along the way. And I also want to just make sure that I've got some skills for this type of environment. So I started doing a little searching online, and that was the first time ever that I came across survival schools. And I was like, what? You've got schools here that teach survival skills? So this was foreign to me, right? Like, survival skills were things that you just learned as a kid from your parents and being in the bush, and then you just learned from the natives. Like, you watched them and learned from them. But to have schools that actually run survival skills training courses was something I was right up my alley. So I immediately signed up for one. Within the first couple of days, the instructor and myself realized that we definitely had to do something together. They employed me. I went through a full instructor program and just dedicated my life to this whole survival / primitive skills world, and realized that there was not only schools, but there's whole communities that live and practice around these traditional skills. You know, and there's big communities in Utah and Idaho, all the Pacific Northwest. I mean, there's just a lot of great people that want to keep those traditional skills alive. And so that's really where I would say I honed a lot, and in my bushcraft experience, you know, was connecting with others and then really putting myself out there and challenging myself with very minimal gear in a variety of ways, so that I can really mimic what it's like to be in a survival situation, and then more so just like how our ancestors would have lived off the landscape.
Sure.
That's a long-winded answer.
No, that's great, man. It really kind of sets the stage of kind of like how you have because you have your own, survival school that you're now at the hest of. And maybe let's go ahead and talk about that right now. When did that become something that, you started out? How long you've been doing that? And, where can people take classes? Because I know I've seen some stuff where you do some things in Texas. So it's not even just the Pacific Northwest, right? You kind of have things all over.
No, it's all over. Yeah. Okay. I've run trips all over. And honestly, a lot of it has revolved around different terrains that I want to experience. There will be something that'll attract me to a certain area, and then I will just organize a trip with anywhere from 3 people up to 8 people. In Africa, take 10, and they come and join me, and we experience these things together. So I've done a lot of one-off stuff, Florida, and I've done California and other areas, but Texas has become a pretty good staple. There's the introduction to hunting course that I run there, and that's a real hit. And I do that with my buddy Cole Wilkes, who's a very, very renowned elk hunter. So together we go out there and we just kind of give a great foundation to anyone who's never hunted, has no clue, to people that have tried and have been frustrated. So we really want to shorten that learning curve. We're running a 2-day elk hunting course here in Central Oregon, actually this weekend. and plan to run more. The hunting, I think, is going to be a big one for the future of the school, but it traditionally is bushcraft and survival. So I've gotten more into kids classes, which I run through the summer here. And then the biggest course of the lot is running a full immersion trip with the Hadza Bushmen in Africa. And that's every like May, June time. It's somewhere around there. And that's an incredible experience where we are fully immersed with them. The trip is 10 days long. We're with them for a full week. And this is life-changing. I mean, incredible to be able to be immersed with these ancient hunter-gatherers and really get to be part of it. Not in a way where you're on the outside looking in. I mean, you're sleeping right next to them. You know, we're hunting with them. We're everything they're doing, we're doing with them. So people get a lot out of that. And that is the most, I mean, I feel so grateful to be able to take people there and allow them to experience this, because there's nothing like it.
Well, walk us through that, because you just had that
yeah.
trip. You just got back. I remember seeing some pictures you were posting and stuff, and I've been dying to hear about it. So you land, and then what happens over that timeline? You know, how long are you there? How many people were there with you this trip? And what was that experience? What were some of the highlights you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I've been running the trip pretty much every year for several years now. There's more or less the same family that we go back to visit. The trip's 10 days. You fly in, and it takes about a day to adjust. I mean, the time change is miserable.
Sure.
And it's quite a long trek as far as drive time to get out into Hadza land, which takes place in the Yaida Valley. There's a huge lake there called Lake Eyasi, and right next to it you get the Yaida Valley, which is sort of adjoined to Ngorongoro Crater, the Rift Valley. You know, there's these ancient lands where, according to a lot of the experts in the field, this is their native land. They might have shifted around a little bit, but they're still living more or less in the same area they have for tens of thousands of years. So we go in there. We have already pre-located them. There's my partner Abbas, who's a local Tanzanian. We have Mike, who is a local Hadza guide and translator, and together they will work at locating the family. We have several areas where they will plan to hike out and bring their belongings, which is not too much, and meet us. And usually that's going to be revolved around the best hunting grounds for that time of year. So they'll be established there. I'll head out usually a little earlier, just to make sure that I can get camp set up and that I get to meet any of the Hadza that I have not yet met, because they intermingle with each other, right? So there's little bands of the Hadza all around the Yaida Valley. And so I want to make sure that I get to meet them, communicate with them, and really establish some like respect and familiarity with them, because we're going to be very intimate with them for, a week. And I want to make sure that they feel comfortable with me, especially, and others. So then the group arrives, and like I said, we have a full week with them, and each day can consist of anything from foraging honey, climbing up the baobab trees and foraging honey out of the hive, and us getting just amazing wild honey, to fruit foraging, so baobab fruits, making smoothies out of those fruits. There's a variety of different berries that we'll pick. There are a variety of different roots that would be harvested, and that's typically by the woman. But every day revolves around food gathering in some shape or form. Of course, the hunting. So the hunting is the big one. The men, they hunt with bow and arrow, which they make by themselves. And the hunts will sometimes be with dogs, sometimes be without dogs. Dogs have been introduced to them a long time back, but by the Ayaki, which is another tribe in the Yaida Valley. And so the Hadza do have dogs now that they use to help them hunt. And the hunts can be incredibly fast-paced to slow and, sort of slow ambush style hunting. And every time I learn something different, every time we hunt something different, it's always learning. But then, of course, you get the unexpected magic from the Hadza, and that is their social dynamic. I mean, they are just such charismatic, proud, capable, competent people. It's so impressive to see their ability to problem solve and their athletic abilities. It's almost like a well-designed machine that's functioning how it's designed. Because I look at the human beings these days, and I've obviously had this reference now for several years to look at them and then look at us, and I'm like, well, what do they have that we don't? Where have we gone wrong? I love to look at native peoples and do the comparisons, so I can try and figure out what I can take to live my life better. Because I do look at them and I see a more well-rounded, content, physically capable, healthier human being. I see them as being just a better version of us. And so I want to look at them and be like, how can I take lessons from them? And the lessons I've taken are just, endless. Some of them are just I'm still processing some of these experiences from like years back.
Sure.
It's an incredible experience. So like I could just keep rambling about them. But yeah, that was in a nutshell, what we're experiencing. We're experiencing their social dynamics. We're experiencing their family interactions between the young and the really old. And we're looking at their actual traditional skills, their friction fire making, and their processing hides, and the way that they process meat, and their hunting dynamics and their foraging. We're seeing all of this as a group.
Wow. Well, that kind of brings up a couple questions. One, I want to know what all you were hunting, and then two, I'd like to maybe have you talk a little bit about that preservation. In being out there, in the bush, like what are they doing and how are they preparing the meat for, being able to have it last? And obviously it's not like refrigeration and freezers like we have in our mindset too. So I was curious about that, and also wondering, is it like, are they doing brain tanning? What are they doing as far as like being able to, keep those hides, and what are they using them for? So I know that's a few questions, but maybe you can kind of, snake your way through those if you wouldn't mind.
I will snake my way through those. I love that you brought that up, because food preservation. So first of all, I would say, so the Hadza, if you we just put it in context to me through my lens, the Hadza are like wild animals. They're totally in tune, and their life cycle and what they do during the day, everything is dictated by the environment. They're completely they are the environment.
They are, right?
They are the environment.
Yeah.
And that is something that we're not on that level anymore. We're domesticated. So I call us the domesticated version of the Hadza. Okay. So with that being said, with domestication comes a lot of false information, and we get conditioned to a lot of things because we're told them generation after generation, and it just becomes kind of indoctrinated in our mind. And the food preservation is one of them. So you'll hear all sorts of things to the domesticated man that, don't leave in the fridge for more than 3 days. That could be dangerous to eat. That's going to, don't leave it out. You can't leave it out. It has to be refrigerated. So these are the things that we're all used to hearing in the domesticated world. For them, they don't have any of that, right? And so how they preserve food is the way we've been preserving food way longer than before we had fridges. Any animal that they hunt is going to be air dried. And they do have the benefit of being in a very dry environment. So it is high desert, but they don't cut the meat very, very thin so that it air dries real quick. They just hang it in big chunks, and they're not making jerky or anything like that. What they're doing is they're just hang drying it until they cook it up again. So everything that they eat, we eat. So I've had groups of people come out there, and there's very few that get an upset stomach from eating that meat. But of course, not just their meat. When we bring in a goat, oftentimes we don't want to put too much pressure on their meat. So we bring in a live goat and we slaughter it with the group, and then we get all the meat and we hang dry it. You just want to get the skin off. So they always take the skin off, and you've just got the bare muscle exposed, and you're just hanging it up in trees high enough to where the dogs and other animals can't get to it. And the meat, they don't preserve meat in the sense that you might have been interested in asking about. Like, they're not pickling, they're not making jerky. What they're doing is they're just storing it up in a tree until the next day they're going to cut a big chunk off it and cook it up. So the preservation is very much short term, but they never wash their hands. So here's the thing with the Hadza is they do not have a lot of water in the Yaida Valley. It's very, very dry. You have a rainy season that's more or less 3 months. You'll actually have some of those dry creeks and stuff flowing with water. And then after rainy season, literally a couple of weeks and everything dries up. So they have to dig seep wells to get all of their water from. So they don't have the kind of water to access for showers and things like that. So they will spend months without bathing, dust bathing, just like elephants. They'll dust bathe. I mean, every day they're in the UV, they're in the dust. But they process animals. Their hands are dirty with blood, dirt, everything. They're then eating with their hands. So there's this constant interaction with blood and dirt and all sorts of microorganisms from the different vegetation and animals and things that they're handling. Then you've got the meat preservation thing. It sits there. Yes, sometimes flies land on it. I mean, the flies land. Sometimes they have some maggots popping out. They don't care. They cook it up and they eat it.
Yeah.
Extra protein. So there is no emphasis placed on meat going bad. I have stored meat for 4 days and it started to go a little green when there was a little bit more humidity, and you just cut those chunks out and then you just cook it up and you eat it. And so, yeah, so great question. And yeah, no, I've never witnessed really long-term preservation. In fact, what happens is if they did get something like an eland or a big game animal, the word spreads through Hadza land, and you'll have other tribal members all of a sudden pitching up in camp to get some food, to have a meal. And most of that food is eaten within days.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You know what? I guess I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, in case people don't understand what a seep well is. And I know that, I've seen you dig one on TV, and we'll kind of get to that in a minute too. But also I was curious too, whenever you're going and meeting the new members of the tribe you haven't met before, or local, folks that are coming in, like you said, whenever I used to work with, a lot of, traditional Native American Indians, there was you'd always bring a gift. You'd always have
Yes.
tobacco, or you'd have some other things that maybe they could use or utilize, that maybe you've already learned that, hey, they might need, these blankets or something, that it's not just like some, gift that's just going to take up space. Something that would be useful. Right. So, I hear you talking about bringing in the goat and having something that you're helping to supplement, so you're not putting too much pressure on the meat. Is there anything that you're coming with whenever, maybe to your friends that you're visiting, maybe there's some things that might help them in different supplies or whatever it may be. But when you're meeting new people, is there something that you're offering or giving? And is there an exchange there that you kind of have?
Yes. They definitely appreciate it. So we take gifts for the Hadza, which is every time we go.
Sure.
It's gifts that are very practical. Right. There is no like with Native Americans, there is a big emphasis placed on tobacco, and that's very much for a spiritual aspect, right? Mm-hmm. For the ancestors, to respect the ancestors. The Hadza do not have, they're very just practical and matter of fact. There isn't this romantic spiritual side to them like the Native Americans provide, which is why I'm so infatuated with the Native Americans. I think that their culture has so much intricacy, there's so much romanticism about it, which I think all of us gravitate towards. Mm-hmm. But the Hadza are just a little bit more just to the point. And so gift wise, it's purely practical. Knives, some cotton blankets. We don't take them like fire starters or lighters or anything like that. We try to avoid anything that's going to change their culture too much, but giving them a full live goat, bringing them some pots, and that because the Hadza will be able to carry everything they own. So the woman will do a lot of beading. So they definitely have their different sort of beads and things for making jewelry. But the men, typically, it's just the bows that they make, the arrows, broadheads, knives. Each person will usually have a blanket, maybe a sweater, and then their pots that they cook with. They usually will have a bucket or two And that's for water gathering from those seep wells. But apart from that, they don't own anything else. So I don't want to influence them too much in the way of them getting addicted to material items.
Sure.
So I will just literally bring them some of the things that I've mentioned. And food's always a good one. Salt. Funny enough, Tandatu, one of the elders, is obsessed with chilies, which is very unusual because the Hadza don't like spicy things. So we'll bring him some chilies, and so yeah, like those kind of things, we'll bring them. But it's the list is very short.
Well, and when you were kind of talking about that, I was imagining, like, are they doing, what kind of, they have like flint, obsidian, what are they making their knives or arrows with that they're producing? Is there a different type of stone there that they're working with?
So yeah, so the answer is unknown, really, but I have some of the elders that have expressed what they understand they used to use, but currently it's steel.
Okay, got it.
And the Datoga, which is a tribe that lives in the same proximity of them, they're pastoralists. They actually do blacksmithing. When that came along, I don't know. But the Hadza initially started trading them honey for them to make them broadheads, and they make pretty good broadheads. I mean, they're not totally symmetrical; they're a little rough around the edges, but the thing is, they're strong and they're sharp.
Yeah.
So that's what the Hadza still use, is they use those steel heads. Now, I've tried to speak to some of the elders about this topic, and I've got a pretty consistent answer as far as cutting tools. They keep referring to a specific type of quartz that's in the area that they used to use for cutting. There's quite a bit of this quartz everywhere you go, you can find it. However, actual knappable stone with a high silica content that gives a good conchoidal fracture, something you'd think like flint, chert, obsidian, they do not have any in the immediate area. But I have found trading posts, and they're always under big rocks, because there's a lot of these big boulders in Hadza land, and they will often camp under them or camp near them, camp on top of them. And so I've found obsidian deposits and all sorts of other types. It looks like kind of jaspers and other types of rock that have been clearly napped with a lot of leftover remnants of flakes underneath these rocks. So I'm pretty convinced that the Hadza did used to use arrowheads that were made from a variety of different rock. But I've been told that from the elders that bone was what they used to use, bone as their arrow points. And then I've also been told that there was a hard wood that they would carve into a broadhead. But either way, the poison was always used. So the poison is ancient. And that poison, there's 3 different sources that they get the poison from. But the desert rose is the plant. It's kind of like a succulent looking, like, I don't know if you've ever seen a baobab. It looks like a succulent version of a baobab that doesn't get all that big. And it's the pulp of the actual trunk that they mash up into a like sort of like it's not quite a liquid, it's more of a mush, and then they'll boil that down for hours, and it'll boil to a black tar, and that tar is kind of like malleable, and they'll basically make a sausage around the sort of shank of their broadhead. And so what happens is when that arrow enters the animal, the bloodstream will then come into contact with the poison, and depending on how much poison they have on there and where they hit the animal will die, sometimes fairly quick, other times take them days to die. But they can take down up, they've killed elephants. I've had the elders tell me about elephants that they've killed by shooting them in the stomach. This is another very interesting topic. Is I say to them, well, where do you shoot big game back in the day when you had those kind of arrowheads? And they said that in the softest parts. So they don't shoot for the ribs or the heart, nothing near the legs. They go for the stomach because it's very soft and easy for the arrow to penetrate. And then the poison, gets right into the bloodstream there very easily. They've been talked about shooting the elephants in the trunk, because it's very soft. So shooting the elephants in the trunk to bring them down. So yeah, like the poison was the key to the success for them taking down big game. And so, yeah, I haven't had definitive answers, but I think that they possibly used rocks and bone and wood and several things for their arrowheads.
But it sounds like, yeah, that's kind of a conduit for the system of the poison to go and do its thing, and or
That's it.
traditionally there. Wow, that's
That's it.
fascinating.
Yeah.
And what were you guys hunting this last trip? What all did you guys get to take and then eat? And what was kind of the reaction from some of the folks who were a part of that journey, maybe for the first time?
Oh yeah, it was incredible. So before the group arrived, we got two bush pigs the first day we hunted, which are pretty much, I mean, similar to like a wild hog here in the US, very, very similar, aggressive. And so we got two of them, and then we got the next day we got a warthog, which was a pretty big deal, because a couple of the elders had not killed a warthog in 7 or 8 years. So it was really special that I could be part of this. And let me tell you something, the meat was absolutely delicious. It brings back memories of my childhood, because when it was a thing in South Africa was, you'd hunt a warthog and you'd put it on a spit, and it would just turn all day long, and only when the meat starts falling off, that's when you start eating it. And the meat was always so incredibly delicious. It's been so many years since I've eaten warthog that there I was eating it with the Hadza. But the special thing about it was that the warthog is officially a peme meat. And what that means is the Hadza have certain animals that they prize the meat and they celebrate the meat. And it's particularly the organ meat that goes to the elders. So there is a ceremonial process around the hunt of any animal that gives good epeme, and that's typically like the cream of the crop would be like an eland or a kudu, but a warthog absolutely is in this category. So it was pretty spectacular to see the excitements and the sort of like the reverence around this hunt. They would process the animal a little differently because they remove all of the chest meat, all of the organs, and the organs stay attached to the tongue. That's all part of the epeme. The elders, which at this point it was only 3 elders, went off and they boiled the meat, and they did ceremony around it, which none of the youngsters or outsiders are allowed to be part of that. So
Sure.
I was dying with interest to know how they do their ceremony, but unfortunately I couldn't be part of it. But then they brought the meat back, and then all of the boys, the men, the males can sit down and eat the epeme. The broth was amazing. They ate, I mean, everything from, like I said, the tongue, you're eating the heart, the liver, the kidneys, and it was delicious. So you eat the skin too. They eat the actual skin that they boil up. Everything was amazing until they brought the testicles out. And I never say no. I mean, I've eaten vervet monkey brain, I've eaten tongue, I've eaten lungs, I've eaten eyeball, I don't think there's many things I haven't eaten from an animal, but the testicles from a male warthog. Now, anyone that hunts wild pig in the US will know that the males are musky, and generally ideally you want to hunt the young, or you want to hunt the females, because they have more fat, they don't have that musky sort of flavor to them. This was very musky. It wasn't the top of my list of enjoyable foods to eat, but I did it. And the whole process of it was amazing. So yeah, we warthog, and then the group arrived, and then we got 3 vervet monkeys the one day. We got 4 baboon another day. We got first for me, bat-eared fox and a genet. I've seen them with the genet pelts that they wear for camouflage and that, but I've never eaten a genet.
What is that? If you can explain.
So bat-eared fox is obviously a fox. Yeah. A genet is a feline, and it doesn't look. It has a slightly longer snout. It's got beautiful like orange coloration to it, and it's a very small cat that's probably about the size of a big house cat, and they're very nocturnal. They do spend a lot of time up in trees. The bat-eared foxes, they live in dens in the ground, and they're also pretty nocturnal. So you don't get to see these animals very much. This was a night hunt, on a full moon that we went out, and we did manage to get those two, and we ate them, and the genet was surprisingly good. So that was the first experience I had of eating a feline or a canine. I'm not adverse to eating anything. I even eat the baboon that they hunt. But predators, of course, are renowned for carrying more parasites and being just sort of a more riskier animal to eat. So that's always been my hesitancy, but I would never say no. I mean, I would eat mountain lion in a heartbeat. I would even eat coyote. I would try anything. And so this was surprisingly good. And they have their way for each animal on like how to prep it, and then they have their little delicacies, like with the baboon, the skulls. They want to eat all the head meat. They just pick all the meat off this, off the cheekbones here, underneath here, and then they crack the skull. They eat the brain, and it's just full of fat, and they just love it. So, yeah, we got 3 dik, which is a very small antelope. It's a miniature antelope. It's no bigger than maybe a Jack Russell sort of size, maybe a little bit bigger than Jack Russell, but a small dog size. And they're absolutely beautiful, very elusive, tiny little horns, maybe 2-3 inches. And they're the most incredible meat out there after warthog. I would say the dik is incredible quality meat. So we got to eat that too. And that's always a hit with the group, because that meat is very easy for anyone who is not really into eating game meat. That's a really easy one to eat. So yeah, that's a big hit with the group whenever we get those. They also do have, so the dik, another thing that we always do when you get those with the Hadza is they have the most ideal skin for making bowstrings. So for whatever reason, the dik, this small antelope, has the strongest hide in that area. So every time those are caught, the hide is stretched out, scraped, and then dried, all the hair removed, cut into rope, re-soaked, and then basically twisted into a bowstring. So we get to always have that experience when we get a dik too, which is really cool.
So are you hunting when, I mean, I guess that's a 2-part question. Are you doing any of the hunting yourself, and are you drawing back? And are you then using, I assume you're using their traditional setup. Are you also going from A to Z and preparing and maybe doing some of these things and creating your own bow and arrows as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I have. I've created several of my own bows. I've got pretty good at making the bows. The arrows are, to get them to the level of straightness that the Hadza make. I need one of them to like finish it off for me. Just do the finishing touch.
Yeah.
What they do is they'll harvest the arrows, and then they'll straighten them with using fire and their teeth. Their teeth is a big one, so they'll just put it between the teeth, and they'll just like bend it down, switch it around, bend it down. They'll look down the shaft for straightness, bend it. By the end, you have what looks like a Home Depot wooden dowel. It's just perfectly straight. So, and yeah, all the fletching is done. There's a variety of ways that they fletch their arrows. And depending on whether it's going to be hunted for small game or big game, small game tips, they'll carve in blunts. They'll add corn cobs on for blunts. I've seen them melt plastic bottle tops for blunts. They'll also make barbed tips. They'll just have simple, like a sharpened point for bush baby. It depends. They have about 5 or 6 different types of arrows, depending on what they're going to hunt. Sure. And there's specific animals that it's more conducive to like a blunt tip, blunt force trauma kill. Whereas there's other animals, it's better to skewer them and then try and retrieve them that way. And then of course, having the broadheads, they have 2 different types of broadheads. One is very barbed, and the other one is a little more of like a spoon tip for better penetration. The barbed ones are used primarily for baboon, so that the baboon can't pull the arrow out, because the baboons are really smart. They get shot, the arrow's in them, and they try to pull the arrow out. If they pull the arrow out, the poison comes out and the animal doesn't die. So with the barb, they can't get them out.
Wow.
So yeah, so I have had the opportunity. I've made the bows. I have hunted. I've to be honest, I've only killed a few animals. I've killed a baboon. I've killed a dove and about 4 or 5 other birds. There's a lot of bird hunting in Hadza culture because there are so many birds. It's an easy meal. and the kids learn to hunt primarily by hunting things like squirrels and birds and bush babies, the small game. So I'm on the level of a kid when I'm with the Hadza. I feel like a complete amateur when I'm with them. So I spend a lot of time hunting with the kids and hunting birds, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of killing birds with the arrows that I make, the bow that I make with them out there.
Sure.
This year I got a dik, which was really satisfying. And yeah, I'm like right up there in the action with them a lot of the time. I kind of, each time as I go back, I hunt less and less with them, because I kind of want to, instead of being distracted by me focusing on hunting, I want to really witness everything that they're doing. And also, I'm technically not allowed to hunt. So that's another factor too. And so I want to respect that with the regulation. Obviously, anything I'm hunting, that food goes straight to the Hadza. And I'm not hunting very much. I mean, my success rate is very low with them, because I feel like by the time I leave, I've just started to get into the feel of that bow, and each arrow flies differently, So it's extremely difficult. But their ability with a primitive bow and arrow is incredible. The accuracy is incredible. I've seen them shoot doves out of trees at 35 yards. It's unreal.
So how are you, maybe, because maybe they already know everything, but it's like, as far as like practicing, like in our mindsets of like how you might prepare for like a bow hunt, you're going out there and you have your own range, you might have, a backstop and you're shooting, and whether it's, rifle or whatever. What are you doing as far as you're practicing? What are you shooting into or at, or is there even that aspect? Or are you just grabbing it and like, okay, Hail Mary? It's like, how does that work?
Hail Mary is definitely one of the aspects, but no, their targets are live targets.
Okay.
Their practice is small game. So they'll start shooting with their bows and arrows, shooting trees and like not stumps. There's not really any stumps, but they'll shoot like the baobab tree that's pretty soft. They'll also have this these different plants there that are very, very succulent, wild sisal, which is kind of compared to like a yucca type, agave type of plant. And that's really good for shooting arrows at, for target practice. So the kids at about 3 years old will start shooting small bows. By the time they've got to 7, they're just shooting small game every day. They're shooting at small animals every day, and that's their target practice. And they miss a lot until they start hitting the animals. And so their target practice comes with hunting, because they're hunting every day, and therefore they're target practicing every day.
Sure.
And so yeah, like it just becomes I mean, what can you compare it to? I mean, every day when you drive to work and you go through the whole routine, it's sort of like their muscle memory is so conditioned to it that they don't really need to practice in the sense, because they're doing it every day.
Right. No, that makes sense. Before we move off the topic, it kind of occurred to me too, and you were saying early on, when you have someone go and find where they are, because they're a part of the environment of what's going on. I was curious about their shelters and maybe what they're doing as far as maybe protecting from the elements, and what their day-to-day is. Is there a time where it's like, this is the rest time? And if so, are they doing it under this type of tree? Or are they creating shelters, or what does that look like in their day-to-day operations in that sense?
Yeah, so it's very seasonal dependent, but so in the rainy season, we'll start there. In the rainy season, they're seeking out caves, and the Hadza understand their landscape intricately. They know where the good camps are for the right times of season. So in the rainy season, they're going to seek out those caves, because those are going to be the driest areas that they can find. They will also, in rainy season, they'll make shelters, and it's sort of like a little sort of hoop house. It's like a dome structure, and they'll use, I've seen tree barks used, I've seen those wild sisal, I've seen grass is used, and they will just layer it up. But those are not 100% waterproof. There will be some water leakage in there. So it's really hard with the available materials that they have there in the high desert. I mean, you're talking about savanna woodland that is primarily acacia and baobab trees, and you're talking about trees that don't provide a lot of foliage, and so not ideal for building a shelter to protect you from the rain. So those are the two ways they'll tackle the rainy season. In the dry season, I've seen them sleep just out in the open under the stars, and that's primarily where they will sleep. I've seen them make little bomas around them, just kind of like little brush walls around them, just as enclosures. I've seen them dig out the dirt a little bit to create like a little dip for a bed, but they don't typically have any cover over them in the dry season because they don't need to. They'll always camp near a baobab tree. That's pretty common. They'll always camp near a baobab tree because the baobabs out there are such providers. They often have beehives in them where they can harvest honey. The fruits are a big staple for them in their diet. The young leaves can be eaten raw. The baobabs in really tough times in drought, you can actually cut out pieces of the wood. There's not really any bark. It's kind of like a balsa wood type of consistency, and they suck the water out of that wood to hydrate. There's also pockets, like a lot of baobabs are hollow, so rain will get caught in pockets in the trunk of the tree, and they'll climb down in there and get the water and drink it. Elephants in dry season, you can see a lot of the scars on the baobab trees from them ripping out the bark so that they can suck on the water too. So yeah, like the baobabs are such a key part for their environment, but the baobabs are not providing any cover. It's just more of what they provide for them. So.
Wow, man. Well, that's fascinating. And people can join you on this. Is this something that they contact you? And how are you kind of selecting who goes and that kind of process as well? And you're doing this once a year, right?
It's once a year, but I have done like two trips back to back. Next year is possibly gonna be that. But yeah, I would like to run it more, but the other demands in life, the other focuses and things that I have on. This is my son Talon. Say hi.
Hello.
Just on a
there.
podcast, boy.
My name is George. It's nice to see you.
This is George. He's waving at you.
Hi there.
So yeah, I take 10 people, and it is sort of a first come first serve. But I do schedule a phone conversation. I do need to kind of vet the people and just make sure that they're knowing what they're getting into and that they're physically capable. And I do have sort of health related questions because we're out extremely isolated, and I want to try and avoid any medical emergencies out there because it would be pretty bad. Yeah. So, but like I said, there's no prerequisites apart from being in reasonable physical shape. And I think how I word that in the website is, you need to be able to hike up to 20 miles a day, without a pack, just a basic hike. If you can do that, that's sort of the level of endurance we're hoping for, because some of the hunts, you never know. They're always hunting, right? So we go out on a little hike, and next thing you know, a troop of baboons comes by, and then the hunt's on. And then it could be tracking them down for hours to where are they bedding, where are they moving. And next thing you know, you're boots on the ground for the entire day. And there's often times we'll be in that situation and we don't have water. So we're going to have to go and search for a water hole somewhere. So we get a little dehydrated, and I'm determined for us to mimic the Hadza as much as we can, to fully appreciate how they live. And sometimes that means not drinking for a while, and that means like being hiking all day long.
Wow. So, well, I mean, it sounds like you're in the rhythm of their life, and you're going with doing what they're doing. So yeah, you kind of got to be prepared for anything.
And you got to be prepared for anything. And that's how the trips run. In the beginning, it was pretty stressful for me because I'm used to like running workshops where I'm like, okay, at this time I'm going to do this, and I'm going to teach this skill. Yeah. And with the Hadza, I was trying to do that, and I realized that first of all, they don't work to they don't work to any schedule, right. And I'm not going to change that. I don't want to influence that. I just rather want to be the fly on the wall. And so I started just being completely opportunistic. I'm like, what do you guys want to do today? And we just tag along. And now I trust in it so much that whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen, and it's going to meant to happen. You know, it's incredible the opportunities that pop up. And when they do, I just tell the group, you got to be ready to go. It's go time.
Yeah.
So we just like flies on the wall. We're just there, just observing all of this incredible ancient wisdom and skills firsthand.
No, it absolutely. I mean, I've had some experiences with, various indigenous and native tribes, and you talked about like that idea, like native time, like it's its own thing too.
It's the
And
same thing.
I remember we were doing it was back in 2001. I was working with Harvey Arden, my buddy that was with National Geographic, and we had Chief Orville Looking Horse. He's the 19th generation keeper of the sacred white buffalo calf pipe in the
Oh,
Lakota Nation.
wow.
And he
Yeah.
was we had this event at Harvard. It was one of their first like kind of big webcast things, like, it's early technology, right? 2001. And we had a certain timeline that we had to be there. It's Harvard, it's like so we're like trying to rush him to get there. And we just, it kind of came face to face with native time. He was just doing his own thing. And it was like, we were like, we kind of got to go. And it was like this convergence of, this Western world on rigid time stuff, and him where he was like, no, I'm doing this with my family, or I'm having this, or I'm going to have he had a ceremony before he went out to make sure that he got in the right space. And like, it was just funny because everyone's like, why aren't they here? I'm like, it's native time, man. This could be, you might schedule for 11, but they might not show up till 12. So it was like
I mean, yeah, you think about it, they're not running they're not using watches, right?
No.
Everything is dictated by daylight and heat.
Yep.
A lot of the time, or heat or cold, like all the movements are going to be done around that.
Yeah. No, it was just incredible for me to learn when I'm out there with them and traveling, the idea of just being so, you have to be in the moment. You have to, there's a patience that comes from that. There's an understanding that comes with that. And there's the connectivity that comes from that. And like, and you immerse yourself into their time and their life, and you just become, you're not messing with what they're doing, but you're with them and helping and not trying to control anything. I think a lot of people have that idea, say, well, I'm going to go do this. It's like, I'm going to go help them, like, no. Just, you kind of become them, and it's a sacred thing to be welcome into those types of environments. And it's a huge honor, as I know you're aware of, and to let someone into your culture and or be let into their culture. It's a wonderful, amazing, and learning process. So I'm excited for all that you do and all that you've shared, man. I mean, I was glued to Instagram and checking your page and all the amazing photos and stories you were sharing. I'm excited to hear more about it today.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and like, I think you've got to always mention the good with the bad, right? So yeah, we could talk about all the amazing things, but bottom line is that there's also the bad side, and the bad side is that the Hadza they're in jeopardy of losing their way of life. There are some really good organizations like the Dorobo Fund, which the Robo has basically secured, they don't own, but they've got the rights to a huge portion of land in the south of the Yaida Valley, where the Hadza have sort of refuge, if you will. And there's still very good amounts of wildlife and that are down there. A lot of the Yaida Valley, where the Hadza call home, has been, let's say, taken over, but a lot of the land has actually been bought by other tribes, the pastoralists. So you have the Datoga, Raki, you've got these different tribes that are in there, and they're establishing farms, and they have a lot of wildlife. They have, a lot of livestock. So they've got cattle, goats, chickens, donkeys, but in particular the cattle, just the way that they move through the landscape, they cause so much disturbance. And they also need to drink from the same water holes, the water sources that the Hadza and the Datoga and all the humans are drinking from. It pushes a lot of the wild animals out of the valley, which traditionally was a travel corridor for them from the Ngorongoro crater, which was that's a wildlife sanctuary. It's incredible. It's a national park. A lot of people go there to see wildlife every year. It's a huge crater, and it's like a savanna inside the crater. This was the Hadza's traditional hunting grounds until they got pushed out of there. So they're losing the variety of animals that they used to hunt. So they've had to resort a lot more to hunting with small game. Tourism is a very sticky subject. it's one of those subjects that there's no, it's so hard to find the right and the wrong. There's arguments from both sides. What I'm doing, I'm not even 100% convinced is in the Hadza's best interests. But, you know, what I'd like to point out is that the Hadza there's obviously been a lot of awareness created around the Hadza. Guys like, you know, like Joe Rogan has had on David Cho, and there's been the carnivore MD guy who's gone there. And I mean, it's mainly diet related, right? That's a lot of the fascination with the Hadza has been diet related. And there have been people that have gone out there to experience this firsthand. And then they talk about it in podcasts and they create a lot of awareness about the Hadza, which then I think attracts a lot of people to going there and seeing them themselves. Now, there's the most common way of tourism out there is safari companies arrange trips, which are one-day trips. You have to drive all the way down there. You get an hour or two with the Hadza. The Hadza, they do a dance, they do some friction fire, they shoot at a couple birds, and then the tourists pack up and they're gone. And it's like this all day long. Cars in, cars out, cars in, cars out, tourists in, tourists out. The tourists, and I can't hold anything against them, they're coming there to view wildlife, and then, hey, there's this Hadza trip. And when they come in, they're feeling, their emotions are, I'm feeling sorry for the Hadza, because these people are living in the dirt, you know, they're having to hunt for all their food. We feel so sorry for them. Here, take this watch, take some money, and so the money has infiltrated their culture in a way that is definitely a negative. So they do crave money now. They want to make a living. And unfortunately, there's no turning back from that. That's sort of, they've eaten the forbidden fruit. And I take it upon myself every year to understand, to explain, as deeply as I can to them, the risks. But how can you explain to a child the first time that they eat chocolate that it's not good for them and they shouldn't eat it, when their body is telling them this is amazing, the feeling they get? When you tell them that they really should avoid relying on making money because they can provide all the food for themselves. However, if they make money, they could go and buy alcohol, or they could go and buy soda, or they could, you know, they're like, well, why? You know, so I think that they understand some of the danger, but at the same time, it's been a lot of factors that have influenced it. And I would personally say one of the major factors here are the guides. The guides have seen this as a money-making business, and they will approach certain Hadza and strike deals with them to bring tourists into that area. And so there's this exchange, this monetary exchange, which has become something that has become like they rely upon. So unfortunately,
okay, Bob, I love you. Have a good day. Sorry to have to interrupt you.
No,
on
it's
that
okay.
One.
Hey, nice to see you. Take care.
Love you, boy. I'll see you later. Okay. All right.
So this topic that I'm talking about could go on for ages, and I don't want to kind of get really into the weeds, but tourism is both positive and negative depending on how it's done. You look at the way, in my opinion, the way I'm doing it, the way that the Robo Fund is doing it. These are tourists that are being attracted to these specific full immersion experiences with reverence and respect for the Hadza, and coming into it the right way, where the Hadza are being encouraged to display their traditional skills. And that's what we're there for. I said to I always say to them every time, I'm like, we come to you because of what you are. If you change, we stop coming. So I try to do whatever I can to get them to keep passing the skills down onto the youngsters to keep doing what they're doing. The money is something that's not going to change, but if they can find some sort of a balance, and I ultimately think, there's a lot of books on the Hadza, and I've read a lot of them, and I think that ultimately the anthropologists look at it in this way. They're like, the moment that the Hadza stop hunting and foraging for their food is ultimately the end of their culture. Sure. And so the way I look at it is they need to keep foraging and they need to keep hunting. So I donate money to the Hadza. I put a Hadza kid in school. help them out as much as I can, and there's a lot more that I'm working on to help them. But the Robo Fund is a really good place if anyone wanted to donate money to help the Hadza. But yeah, ultimately securing more land for them is what I'm trying to work on, and I'm really trying to allow them to find a balance where they can make a financial living, but they still get to hunt and forage and pass those skills on to their kids.
Well, absolutely, because if they don't have that land, and like you're talking about the encroachment of other areas and tribes, and then other types of livestock and things that are pushing out the native, the animals that are there, that culture can end that way. That way of life can end that way, or at least slow down to where eventually it drips down to that assimilation into another culture, into the money, into the things like that, to where, we've seen this blueprint all over the world, right? It's like,
exactly.
And it's like, oh, let's go get involved in this, indigenous culture, and let's go study them, and let's go bring our ways to them. And then all of a sudden they're not there anymore. And you have fewer and fewer of these types of pockets of people who are living in tune in that thing that we romanticize a lot. I mean, maybe you and me understand it in a different way, but a lot of people, and maybe we even romanticize it too, but that connectivity that you are really living with the earth, with those things, those skills, those things. It's more of a way of life. It's not just like, oh, I've learned this. It's like, no, this is how it's a survival aspect. And,
it's a survival aspect. Yeah.
And, I guess that's a good pivot point now to talk about maybe, all the things that you've learned from your travels, from the different courses that you've taught, that you've taken, maybe, eventually you were brought to the experience of being able to showcase and to practice these things in the TV show Alone. And I'm curious how that kind of ended at your doorstep. Is that something you sought out? Did someone suggest to you? Like, how did you get involved? And then, for those who don't know it, you were in season 7. You've also been in the skills challenge, but in season 7, you were in the Slave Lake, was it, in the Northwestern Territory of Canada in Arctic?
Correct.
And
Great Slave
so maybe
Lake,
talk about this and talk about that experience, and maybe just kind of, let it go. I'd love to hear more about that and how that came to be.
That was a life-changing experience. I mean, when people say, I had a life-changing experience, at the moment, you feel the gravity of the experience, and then over time, it wears off. So it is life-changing in that moment, but the lasting effects are not that profound. This was a life-changing experience. The effects, I don't think, will ever die off. The way I look at things, the way I look at my life, the level of gratitude that I have, and the level of connection that I have with, our creator and the natural world, has just been, it was such a pivotal moment on my life. And, a lot of people look at those experiences as simply like going out there and trying to competitively win a competition. That wasn't my objective from day one, and it wasn't my objective during. And, I knew that it was going to be, for me, almost like a rite of passage, like the culmination of my spiritual beliefs and my physical skills, my relationship with the natural world and the wildlife. It was going to put all of that like in the same, it was going to throw it all together, and we were going to see what's going to happen. And it was everything I could have asked for. Alone came out of a different TV show on Discovery Channel called Bushcraft Build-Off that I'd done back in 2016-ish maybe. And through that, I'd met two people that I admired deeply, Matt Graham and Dave Nisia. Matt Graham is renowned for dual survival and a few other Discovery Channels that he's done. He's in the primitive skills world. You'd be hard pressed to find too many individuals that could display more knowledge than he has. And so the moment that I took that show opportunity, I knew that I'm going to get to meet Matt Graham and get to know him and ask him a lot of questions. And so we really hit it off. And Matt and Dave were very good friends. And so we would, around the campfires after filming, we'd really chat a lot about different things, mainly atlatls and bows and arrows and things. And Dave was from season 3 of Alone. He had done it 2 years prior, I think it was. And I just said to him, hey, Dave, if Alone ever asks you if they need anyone, put in my name. Sure enough, it was 2018 and I got a call. And they're like, Dave recommended you, and we just wanted to find out more. And one thing led to another, and I was selected out of the 22 people that went to boot camp. I was selected as one, and the whole experience happened. It happened, and I look back and I'm like, man, how lucky, how grateful, because you have tens of thousands of people that apply for these shows to be on the Loan. And I got selected for that experience, and not to mention that just the experience of being out there alone. The whole experience with the production team was amazing, but more importantly, the people that I met at boot camp, and of course that did the 10 people that were selected for the show. I mean, lifelong friends, and the amount I've learned from them, and the amount of respect that I have for them has been also, it's been such a blessing. I mean, Cole Wilkes, my closest friend and my hunting partner, and I mean that he was from boot camp, and so we were like thick as thieves, us two. So yeah, the whole experience was incredible. I mean, I don't know what avenue you want to go down, but there's a lot of different ways I could talk about my experience.
Well, and I think, we may have to have a part 2 because there's so much to cover, but for those who don't understand, maybe kind of lay out the premise of, you're allowed to take a certain amount of things with you. What's the goal there? What is the end all being? I know it's like 100-day, right? Is like the challenge, but there's 10 other people, and maybe kind of lay out exactly how it is, and then where you were, and kind of, maybe, take it what you took with you, and maybe some of those reasonings behind that.
Yeah, so Alone is pretty typically based on a last person standing wins $500,000. Season 7 was the first and only one up to date that did a $1 million challenge to hit 100 days. So I think before that, 82 days was like the record, which is substantial, and they wanted to hit that 100. So and we were in the Great Slave Lake. They've done it a lot in Canada. They've done the one in Patagonia, Mongolia. So they tried to choose different locations. I think this year's season 10 is just airing right now. So I was season 7, and you get given 10 survival items to choose from. You then have to film everything yourself. So the 10 items you take with you, a bunch of camera gear is dropped off preemptively for you, and then a helicopter or a boat, some way you get dropped off out into these wilderness areas, and then you're left alone with, except for medical checks and camera, they take your SD cards, the batteries, med checks, and that once every 10 days. So once every 10 days, you'll have some brief visitation from the production team.
And a sat phone too, in the case of emergency, right?
Yes.
Or something.
Okay. Then a whole bunch of safety gear, depending on where you are. Like bear spray, bear bangers, life jackets, whistle, like a whole host of things. Yeah, you'll have a beacon that you carry, satellite beacon, 24/7. You'll have a satellite phone that you carry. Chippy, come here. My dog's going a little crazy behind me. Yeah. And so, yeah, safety-wise, they do take as good a care of you as they possibly can. But when I say that it's you're alone. Right. And I know that in my season, provided the lake wasn't froze up and the weather wasn't really bad, the quickest they could get to you if you push that button is 2 hours. A lot can happen in 2 hours.
Sure can.
So yeah, you're dropped off. You have the 10 items, of which you can choose from quite a big list. And for me, it was a sleeping bag, a pot, a ferrocerium rod, so fire starter. I took a Leatherman multi-tool. I took a gill net, my bow, and 9 arrows. So that's one item, is a bow and 9 arrows. An axe, a saw, snare wire, and I guess a pot. I think that was the 10.
And fishing line and hooks, right?
The fishing line and hooks. I already mentioned pot. Yeah, fishing line and hooks. So I was very food heavy when I was thinking of my items, because I knew that with my body type and with the nature of spending a long time out in the woods, everything boils down to food in the long run.
So what's stage 1? You get there, you've got all your gear. I'm sure you kind of do an introduction. I know you brought a friend to put up with you, or you found a friend.
Yeah,
and then, but as far as like, what is your, for those who may, not everyone's going to be out there in the Arctic and lost and stuff, but there's certain things that you probably need to take care of right off the bat. And what are those things, and how did you go about in doing that?
Yeah, so you get dropped off by helicopter on day one, and it's late afternoon. So you have probably 3 or 4 hours of daylight before you got to take care of somewhere to sleep for the night. You're always with the Loon, you're always near a lake. So water is never like an immediate thing. But the fire and the shelter is something that's, I think, on most people's minds immediately, because the fire is absolutely crucial to have out there, not necessarily on day one of drop off, but for long term, once the winter really starts to set in, it's absolutely crucial. So the first thing that I think most people like to do when they get dropped off, what I did was I just have to take a moment. The gravity of prepping for an experience like this, and then it's, they interview you before you go, and then you say goodbye to your partners, and then they drop you off and then they're gone. That's it. Nothing but just silence. Some people have the tendency to get quite overwhelmed that, oh, it's actually happening. I must be honest, I didn't have that. I had the feeling of like, finally, I want to do, I'm comfortable here. I just want to be left alone now and do this thing
for so long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just built up and built up. I was like, I just dropped me off. I mean, I think that I had spent so much time alone in the woods in the past that this wasn't foreign to me at all. It was just like another experience that would have gone on. And I just wanted to get the experience started. So I was like a kid in a candy shop. I was beyond excited. So I just tried to explore a little bit and just take in all the beauty, and then just throw together. They give you a tarp, right? That's not one of your 10 items. You have a tarp it's pretty small. I think it was 10 by 12. But you have a tarp to cover your camera gear because they want to make sure that that's all protected. And of course, we use it to build shelters. So we have a tarp, and I just basically threw some string up between 2 trees and just made a little makeshift A-frame that I tucked into for that night. I made a fire just to test out some of the tinder sources there, which had some birch bark, which was really good. And so I'd found some good tinder sources, so I knew I could make fire. And I had a tarp, strung it up, and I was looking around, and I already knew that the kind of materials that I need to build a shelter, I have plenty in the area. So that's already setting my mind at ease. So I'm just trying to get through the night. And then, of course, I think day one, like the first full day, that is all about scouting. It's like, okay, where do I want to set up shop? And to me, a lot of my thought process was based around food. I had two ways of thinking about it. I was like, fish is going to be a huge resource out here. Would I rather build my shelter near a fishing source? But in the way my land was situated, I was also very heavily focused on big game. And I knew that if I was set up near the water where I was, chances of a moose walking by were going to be pretty slim. So I scouted out this peninsula, and I realized that there would be a specific travel corridor in this one area. And if there were going to be any moose coming by, that would be the spot. So I decided to build my camp near where these moose would come through. And funny enough, you don't see it on the show, but a moose did come through on day 5. And I did shoot it. And it ran out of my area. We have areas that are dictated from like these GPS, like what would you call it? Like
your coordinates. Like, yeah, you have a
coordinates,
boundary,
like
an invisible boundary.
Yeah, and if you step out of them, they get alerted to it, and you get contacted. Hey, you're out of your boundary. Move back. So I'd shot this deer, which I'd basically raked him in when I was trimming limbs off of a birch. I think it was a birch or a fir tree, and so spruce. And so he came on in all interested, like, what is this, another bull raking in my territory? And I managed to put an arrow in from what it looked like a good shot to me, slightly low. And it looked to me like a heart shot as opposed to a lung shot. And he took off, and I ran after him, and he bedded down. He looked hurt, and I could see his whole left leg was, bright red blood was dripping down. And so I thought, well, this is it. And so I immediately realized, though, when I was out there looking at him, that I did not have my camera with me. And that's pretty bad. So I decided, long story short, to go get my camera quickly. I came back and he was gone. The blood trail was very poor and such a tough area to track blood in. I mean, the ground has just these crowberries and all these little lingonberry leaves are turning red because it's in the fall, and it's like to try and find blood there is so difficult. And I just couldn't find him. I suspected that he'd crossed over the creek, and I couldn't cross over. That was my boundary. So I spent 2 days searching my entire area trying to find him, and I couldn't find him. And that is what happens with bow hunting.
Yep.
At the time it was devastating. But yeah, this is some of the behind the scenes stuff that didn't get shown for obvious reasons. You don't want people to freak out about a moose that was shot and not recovered. I can tell you that the food chain over there's a dozen different animals that would have fed off that moose. So it's not like it went to waste.
Right.
But I didn't get to eat it.
Yeah.
I didn't get the meat, which would have given me a huge advantage. And so unfortunately, that was the only negative experience that I had on my trip. But I look back and I'm just like, well, the experience is what it is. I mean, I can't do anything about it. But yeah, that was where I wanted to build my shelter, and it worked out to be in a good location. However, I had to travel pretty far to go get to my fishing net every day. So I used a lot of calories to do that. So, but yeah, day one was find that shelter location. I even started up erecting the A-frame, and by day 3, I was catching fish in the net, and I had my shelter totally livable. The tarp was over it. I'd already put up some brush around to create walls, because I was just a little more cognizant of, like, I don't want a bear coming into my shelter at night.
Yeah.
You didn't. Yeah, I did. Yeah. And I didn't. I was very, very practical and efficient with my shelter. The shelter that I started with is the shelter that I lived in. I didn't have like one temporary shelter and then try and build a whole log cabin on the sideline. I didn't want to waste calories in building a huge structure. I wanted it to be smaller and easier to heat up and warm up. The other cool thing about the shelter when I built it was they didn't really display this on the season. Was I found an old rusted empty oil can, and I found, which was probably like 2 or maybe 3 gallons. And I found a bunch of tin cans, all rusted, right? But I took the tin cans, cut the bottoms out, and then sort of pushed them into each other. And I effectively made a flue pipe that came out the top of that oil can, which was like the top of like a wood stove. And underneath it had my fire. So I had a great little chimney that funneled the smoke outside and kept the shelter really nice and warm. And I was pretty proud of that. Did it all with my multi-tool, just cutting the tin up and reshaping it. So
yeah, using what's in your environment, whether it's the natural or not. I mean, I've seen I think it was a meat eater show where all of a sudden one of the guys like, look at this, and it's like an oven rack, and they were like cook their steaks on it. And he's like, oh yeah, somebody just threw this out here, and it's like this horrible thing that it's like you're completely why is this in this environment? But at the same time, it was like, for them, they're like, this is awesome. We got a grill.
You got a grill. Use it.
You got to use everything around you, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and you made it to day 40, and there's something that I really took hold of too. That so you made a promise to your wife that if your body got to the point where it wasn't safe to continue, you would call it, and you wanted it to be on your terms, and you did it. And, there was a quote you said, the real blessing is my family, and that is more important than anything else. And that speaks to me. And I think it's like you have to know, you can't always beat the environment. You can't always, there's certain times where you have to be able to pack it in and know that you did everything you could in order to be able to, whatever it is, if it's a hunt, if it's, and we can apply it to our work, whatever it is in life, there's a certain point where you can say, I did all that I could do. And when it comes to be a safety issue, that's something else that you have to take. And it's not about, trying to be the strong man or woman, and you have to know what's right. And you called it on your terms. And I have a ton of respect for that, Joel. And I kind of maybe want you to talk about that and that aspect, because I feel like, watching your journey there, it's a win for me, like seeing all the things you did, and I'm just it was a wonderful thing to be a part of. And I have utmost respect for you and for also making that decision to make sure that you're coming back in the right way for your family.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all the kind words. Yeah, that was not an easy thing for me to do, because
Sure.
it's not conducive to my personality. It's I want to go until there's nothing left on the table. So it was a really tough decision. But I did make that promise. I had a 2-year-old son at home, and I'm the breadwinner of the family. And if I had something happen to me, whether not as serious as death, but like a physical, I mean, Corey's a great example from my season, right? Or he was carrying a log and he stepped that bog. You walk through that bog, it's really hard to tell if it's a soft patch of moss and there's like a hole underneath it. And anyways, he stepped in one and he damaged his knee, and he's had issues for years. Still to this day, he's got issues with that knee. And I just thought, if I do something to my body that doesn't allow me to work, or even worse, it has a permanent injury, there's too much more that I want to do in life, that I would really hate to like not be the best father and that I can be for my son because of a physical limitation. And you do think about those things out there. You have so much time to think about everything. So, you think about all the ins and outs of like what can go wrong. And I don't typically think that way. I'm typically like a little bit sort of naive in the sense of like, everything will be fine. Everything will be fine. But I had to make that decision. And it was a big hit to my ego, because it was a big hit in a couple of ways. Leaving alone was kind of like a bad breakup. I felt heartbroken leaving that environment, which I felt so in tune with. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave. But my body wasn't able to give me what I needed it to give me anymore. And, like you say, on my terms, I could have done what others have done and just lay in my shelter all day, conserve calories, and then just come out every now and then, maybe set the net and, get a fish or two. But is that the kind of experience that I wanted? Is that the kind of experience that's really going to benefit me? I didn't see how it would. So I decided to, while I still had enough energy, was to just call it. And, the thing that was so profound was getting to the family aspect. In the beginning, there definitely was the competitive side of me that, hey, I would love to do this 100 days. I mean, I'd love to win this thing. I knew I had the skills to do it, but I knew that my limitation would be my body with a high metabolism. I'm generally just a lean guy. I wasn't able to gain 30 to 40 pounds of, body fat like other contestants were. So I had to rely heavily on food. I started getting food consistently, and I thought, oh, wow, I don't need to hold back. I'm doing great. And I could have definitely done better with conserving my calories, but I was so driven and motivated out there that I wanted a full experience. It was not too far down the road where I realized just how fantastic I had it in my life. Like just how amazing, my family, where we live, like how good I have it, that it started to really ruin the competitive aspect for the money. I was just like, I have won. I am rich. I think of what I got. Yes. I am rich. Yes. I'm like, and I kept on coming to the same thought. It was always like the money would make my life easier, but not better. And so with that realization, I just didn't have the drive to go out and win, but I wanted to be out there for as long as I could, purely because I'd established such a beautiful relationship with the spirit of that land. It was very accepting of me and supportive of me that I just wanted to continue feeling that. My mind slowed down to the pace that our human minds are designed to run at. And when you know that feeling, it's so blissful that you don't want it to end. You just, where boredom doesn't even happen, where everything, rain, wind, snow, you just accept it. It's all just accepted as natural, and it is what it is. And that is such a blissful feeling, because you feel like you are absolutely connected with the landscape in a way that we are designed to be. And I didn't want to leave that. But my body was not allowing me to take care of those fundamental things, which what really boiled down to was a lot of severe insomnia. I think it was a mineral deficiency. Dehydration and insomnia were really debilitating for me. I think a lot of my fatigue was coming from that, not so much starvation. I think it was more related to a lack of nutrients and dehydration. So yeah, I decided to call it, and because I sat there on what was it, day 39, and I was thinking about my experience, and I had wolves. I saw the wolves across on the frozen lake, and they were howling at me, and I was just like, what else do I want? I mean, I've done everything I could have imagined, and I thought to myself, the only thing that I really wanted to do was I really wanted to hit day 60. I really wanted to hit day 60. That was like my minimum requirement personally. And I really wanted to be able to fish in the ice, chip a hole in the ice and fish in the ice. I thought that would be an amazing experience. I've never done that before. And so I was looking at it, and I was like, the only reason that you'd want to stay is an ego thing, because I kept on getting attached to that number, right? And so I just had to put my ego aside and just be like, you know what, tomorrow's day 40. 40 is a good, 40 is a good number. I think it's time. And so, yeah, I called it. And obviously now I do have some regrets. I wish I could have been out there longer in that, but at the time it was the best decision I could make.
Yeah. Well, it like you said, it's something that you continually can learn from. You can look back on it and say, I wish I maybe had done this or that, but that's not what it's like when you're really in the moment of something and you're living that. You're not thinking about that alternative, kind of the metaversal thought, like of what would I do here in this? And you're just being in that moment. You're in tune with that environment.
Yeah.
And then, then like the reward is at the end, you've had that experience, then you get to go back to your family, and you get to go back and you can apply all the things and those experiences you've learned, and they can continually roll out. Like you're saying, you're still thinking about your trip with the Hadza, like from years ago, that there's still things that, and I'm sure that your time at the Loon and like all these experiences, as you kind of can come to, have those in your life and apply them however you do. And I know I want to talk again. We're going to have you on the podcast again, because I feel like there's hours and hours of conversation we can have. I know that, we're a little limited in time today. So, before we go, I'd love for you to, two things. One, I want you to talk about where everyone can contact you, learn more about what you got going and some of the courses you have and how they can get involved. And then, I think this may be a great touching point to your experience there with the Loon, because I think that there's some things that tie into it. I'd like to know about what you want your legacy to be, and how you want to, be remembered, and, maybe that's in the professional setting, and, and maybe some of these experiences we've talked about today, and maybe, as far as like that, and how it is like personally as a family man. And, you can touch on that however you want, but those are the last two things I kind of really wanted to hear you speak about.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the legacy thing. I don't have any desires for any legacy. I'm just a humble two-legged. I don't feel like, as if being a human being, that I'm anything special. And I do think that humans are generally inferior to the natural world. I could pick almost any animal and look at it with greater admiration than I can looking at any other human being. So for me, the legacy is just simply like, if I could have people say, he was a good person. He was a good person. There was light that came off of him. He affected people in a positive way. Man, that's all I ask. I'm here to represent that of, our creator, the light, the goodness in the earth. And I try my best to live my life to doing that. And that's all I want. It would mean a lot to me if my son could grow up throughout his entire life looking back and being like, I was proud of my dad for whatever reason, but I'm proud of my dad. I'd be totally happy with that. I'm not looking for a lot. I'm here just to experience this amazing thing called life. I think it's an absolute blessing. And I love walking down the road trying to learn more about it each and every time. So
great answer, man. Love that.
So that's it. As far as finding me in that, first of all, I don't teach full-time anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I burnt out from teaching full-time. So I do part-time, and I found a really good balance. So please, if anyone reaches out, just don't inundate me with requests to do a lot of private training stuff. I'll pick and choose accordingly. But there are going to be scheduled courses. There's not a lot of them. But yeah, bushsurvivaltraining.com is the website. The Hadza trip is obviously a big one. If anyone is very interested, that's the website. You can also check out my YouTube channel, Joel V Bushcraft. Instagram, I'm not really very active on Instagram, but that's also Joel V Bushcraft. But YouTube channel has quite a few Hadza videos, and that's where people can really get some insight into how the interactions are going to be. And then they can also they can reach out through the website. That's the best way to reach out to me, is just through the website, bushsurvivaltraining.com. But yeah, I'm always wanting to run new types of courses, and the hunting direction, especially involved with my partner Cole Wilkes, who's involved with Hunt Wars and Elk Bros. We're diehard elk hunters. It is the passion. Well, we hunt other things, but elk are just, I think, the cream of the crop when it comes to any species you're going to hunt. And so we're definitely going to be doing more together in the future. Elk hunting courses, more introduction to hunting courses, which have been a huge hit. And I love what people get out of that. So more to come.
That's wonderful. And more to come. We're going to have you on here again sometime. There's so many more questions I have, and I've just thoroughly enjoyed your take, your viewpoints, your experiences, what's that's translated through, and what you're sharing with us. And I know I've really enjoyed being able to sit down and chat with you today, and I look forward to doing this again and in person. So we'll have to make that happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure we'll meet in person. And thanks so much for having me. It's been a great opportunity to share some things about the Hadza, and I'll see you next time.
All right, man. Well, you take care of yourself. Enjoy your afternoon.
All right, you too. Thanks, George.
Take care.